Are we good to go, John?
Yes, sir.
All right, so it is 7 o'clock, so I would like to go ahead and call to order the Monday, September 27th, 2021 Board of Education meeting. We'd like to now all stand, please, for the Pledge of Allegiance. Take ourselves off mute. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America
and to the
republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
All right. We got a busy agenda this evening, so let's go ahead and jump right in. Jonathan is unable to attend, which is why I began the meeting, and I do not have a report on his behalf. So let's jump right into the superintendent's report, if that's okay with you, Dr. De Silva.
That sounds good. Thank you, Ken, and welcome everybody. To start off, I know that there were some families that were worried about the bus strike and what they've been hearing along those lines. And actually this board and members of this board all along this summer were concerned as to what impact Ridgefield in particular would have with the busing situation. We continue to have good fortune at this point where we have not been impacted. That said, we don't have an excessive amount of sub drivers. So we're hopeful that our bus drivers stay healthy, are able to make it to work each day. I know how much they matter to our families, and that is the feedback that we continuously receive from families, that our bus drivers know their children, they know their families, they know their pets, they always have a smile on their face. So a special thank you to the Ridgefield bus drivers that come to work every single day, and we have not felt that impact that other communities are facing. So again, a big thank you to our drivers, and honestly to First Student, to Cheryl and Vinny there, who have worked very hard on our behalf. So a big thanks to them. Open house this past week at ERMS and almost CERMS. We had a little bit of a power outage, not a little bit, we had a power outage right before open house. I think I sent out the message on Principal Salem's behalf at about 6 o'clock. Open house was supposed to begin at 6:30, and I think the power went on at 6:31. So unfortunately, the show did not go on. They were all dressed up, the teachers, ready to go. They looked great. Some of them FaceTimed me. They were so excited to meet our families. But unfortunately, that's going to need to be rescheduled. And I know both Principal Salem and Assistant Principal Freese are working on what that's going to look like for our families. So more to come. ERMS did make it through, so that's good news for them. We have our elementary open houses this week. And so our families will have the opportunity for both, or for either physical or virtual. Hopefully there's a pathway that meets everybody's needs. Again, a big thanks to all the leadership for stepping out of the traditional box and making it work for our families and what our families would benefit from. We had professional learning this past Thursday, along with our collaborative hour. It was an engaged day with all the departments running simultaneously. You'll hear from our department leaders this evening around our standardized testing report, but a big thank you to them and the leaders, both teacher leaders and our school-based leaders, for facilitating, running sessions, and really to our families in this Board of Education that continues to support professional learning for our faculty. And later tonight, I know we're going to talk about the Board of Education goals and being a district of choice for our faculty. And I know that professional learning is a big part of that. A couple of business items, or actually one. We are in the process of hoping to transition our move from central office to the new space. It looks like by November 1st, we should be moved in. We're waiting for a couple of okays from the fire marshal before we make that transition, but the next few weeks will be busy. And then lastly, for those that got to watch football Friday night, it was a perfect night out. I was able to post a little video of the events, and I'm so happy for our kids and their families and their coaches and our school-based teachers and leaders that get to go out and watch those events. Whether you're a football fan or not, there's that feeling of football in the fall. So a big congratulations to our players and to all of those that got to engage and participate. And that is it for me.
Ken, you're muted.
I know. I got about halfway through my spiel. So I am only aware of the policy committee meeting between the last Board of Ed meeting. And we're going to be discussing the fruits of that particular meeting this evening. And we've got 4 policies coming up for first read by the board. Dr. DeSantis is responsible for a lot of the updates in 2 of them, and the both with the telecommunications internet access and the bring your own device. We also have 2 policies regarding student, primarily attendance truancy, as well as student discipline, and those are sort of related. And we'll be getting those for first read a little bit later. Were there any other committees I'm not involved in that met, or any liaison reports?
Kathleen.
Yes, Kathleen, go. I just saw you.
I had an energy task force meeting last Thursday, and we all met, and they talked about the Ridgebury School is now online with the solar panels. High school is up, but they're waiting to be inspected by Eversource. So a lot of that is all good news, because that is energy source money that comes back to the district. And then we were talking about, waiting about canopies on the parking lots. And I asked them to send me information about savings for electric buses that they've gotten from other school districts. We were able to talk to people from the Bedford School District who now have already bought an electric bus, and some of the things that are going on there in terms of moving down the line. But a lot of it was talking about funds and whether they can use funds that come from the state to help our renewable resources within the school, particularly getting heat pumps and things that will make the heating and energy resources more renewable and less expensive. So anyway, it was a wonderful meeting, and it's great that these committees, we meet with other committees from towns, talk about what their resources and the things that they're doing. So there we are now. And I sent some of the information to the school board members just so that they would know what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Were there any others?
Yep.
Oh.
I'll let Tina go first.
All right, Tina.
Okay, I have a sinus infection, so if I start coughing really badly, it's not COVID. Don't freak out. So just an update. RC CASA met. Was it last? Yes, just last week, and it was just a very quick discussion about what we as different community representatives feel about the cannabis of the proposed cannabis storefront coming up in Ridgefield. So we're going to have more talks. Sean will talk about it because the follow-up meeting was with the Ridgefield Prevention Council, but that was just a very quick meeting, just initial talks, and we hope to talk about this more in upcoming months, and I'll update the board as and when we do.
Thank you. And Sean?
Feel better, Tina. We had a wonderful recovery vigil for the Ridgefield Prevention Council on the Thursday the 16th at the Playhouse. Very well attended, very somber, full of a lot of amazing stories about recovery. It was inspirational for all, and I hope it was our first annual. I hope we can do it every year because it was really well done. Following that, there will be a Narcan training event in October, which I will send that information on as soon as I get it. And there's a push in November on vaping. It's called Distribute Truth. So we'll look for that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. All right. Is any others? I'm bouncing between screens there. Okay, I think that's all the reports. So why don't we jump on into our discussion of passable action items, excuse me. And Dr. De Silva, are you going to start us off with the standardized testing?
I will. I'll set the stage for my colleagues. So today we're actually introducing 2 new colleagues to the public that may have not seen them present yet. And maybe they have, but I'm not sure. But alongside Corey Gillette, we have Jeff Corbishley, our new supervisor of math science. Annie Tucci, our new supervisor of humanities. And I think some of you have already met Linda Johnson, our elementary director. Alongside Corey Gillette, they're actually going to provide the Board of Education and the public with an update on spring standardized testing, which is it's an awkward report to give this year in particular, because in the spirit of transparency, we want to be able to communicate to you all, what the standardized testing looked like. And yet we all know that the past year and a half has been unique. And so this is one data point along many other data points, many more important data points that we're going to be collecting over the course of the next few years in support of students, whether that's our universal screeners, whether that's our qualitative assessments in the classroom, and that could be conferring with kids, completing running records, getting to know students writing through looking at their writing or their authentic assessments. There are so many more data points that I think are critical for us to look at. But the reality is we did give some spring testing, and we want to be able to communicate what that looks like publicly and give you some insights onto what we know about how our students performed on these particular assessments, and what the state is looking at, if anything at all. So I'll turn it over to Corey, and then after their presentation, I think we'll open it up to questions.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everybody. And Dr. De Silva, thank you so much for introducing the team. I am excited to have Jeff and Annie here for the first time presenting to the Board of Education. So tonight we're going to talk to you about the standardized testing results that we took in the spring of 21. Next slide, please. So our agenda for our presentation tonight starts with a very quick review of those state required assessments that we gave in 21. We're going to talk about those testing conditions that we are all pretty aware of. Then we are going to take you through what those results look like, and we are going to show you what they look like in comparison to past years in Ridgefield. We're going to talk about comparisons, and then we're going to share with you next steps and conclusions. And finally, of course, questions. Next slide, please. So very quickly, I'm going to review for you the state required assessments. Next slide. So as you have heard, and we presented in the spring, there are several assessments required by the state of Connecticut. We have the Smarter Balanced Assessment. It's a computer assessment. It's adaptive, and we give it in grades 3 through 8. And that's both in English language arts and mathematics. And there is an additional portion, which is a mathematics performance task. Then in grades 5, 8, and 11, we give a science assessment that's based on the implementation of the new science standards, the next generation science standards. That is also taken on computer. And then finally, we gave the SAT school day for grade 11. And if you remember, the state of Connecticut uses the SAT as their state assessment for students in high school. And just to note, it is interesting to note that in the spring of 21, that was the last time we will be taking the SAT on paper. This year, we look forward to taking it digitally. So these were the required assessments from the state of Connecticut this spring. Next slide, please. So testing conditions. Next slide. So as I discussed, the assessments that we have always taken were the same assessments that we gave in the spring of 21, but obviously it was very different from the conditions that our students encountered in the spring of 19. And just as a quick reminder, in the spring of 20, we did not take the test at all. The state of Connecticut gave us a waiver, and there was no testing and no accountability. So in the spring of 21, conditions were different because how students learned was different. We were all in, we were remote, we were hybrid, we were a mix. Where students took those assessments was different. We were in home, we were at school, we were a combination of both sometimes. And then who took those assessments was different. While we were required to administer these tests again in the spring of 21, the accountability for participation was not the same. So that's how it was different in the spring of 21. Next slide, please. Results. So we are sharing the results with you tonight, just as Dr. De Silva said, as part of what we do as a district to keep you informed and in the spirit of transparency. And even in a normal year, the data collected from these assessments only serves as one piece of data that we use among many others to inform our practice. This year, we're sharing student performance as a frame of reference for the impact from the pandemic. And we're sharing the student performance as a frame of reference for the impact, and we're responding to it as we move forward. These assessments were given during extreme conditions, which I just shared with you. And while we can and will compare them to past performances, the most important thing that we can do is use this data along with other assessment information to guide us. Next slide, please. So as a quick reminder before we start going through all the different student performance results, there are 4 achievement levels, and that is true for all the assessments that we are speaking about tonight. 1 and 2, 1's not meeting, 2 is approaching, and 3 and 4 are meeting and exceeding. So most of the data tonight, you'll see the percentage of students who met and exceeded benchmark. So Linda Johnson is going to take us from here to talk to us about student performance at the elementary level.
Thank you, Corey. Once again, good evening, everyone. This evening, my colleagues and I will share the data first by results from summative assessment spring 21, according to specific grade levels and content areas. We will begin with ESPA ELA, then move to math, and then the next generation science standards. We will also show comparison data for ESPA over a 5-year period. Jeff and Annie will share results about the SAT. So this slide here represents summative ELA results from this past spring. Overall, as you can see, grades 3 through 5, the majority of our students did reach levels 3 and 4. The percentage of students approaching and below is fairly consistent. You will also notice the pandemic had a minor impact on ELA in Ridgefield at the elementary level. Next slide, please. Now I will quickly take you through the comparison data for the years 2017 through 2021. This slide represents grade 3 ELA. In 3rd grade, the majority of our students met or exceeded achievement levels. This year, there was a minimal decrease in levels 3 and 4, with a slight increase in levels 1 and 2. And pre-pandemic scores are relatively consistent at all levels. Next slide. And grade 4. Again, overall, the majority of our 4th graders reached levels 3s and 4. This year, however, there is a decrease in level 3 and 4 with an increase in the percent of students primarily in level 2. That highlights that students moved from levels 3 or 4 to level 2. Something to keep in mind that this was the first year our 4th graders took the assessment due to the pandemic, when they typically take it for the first time in 3rd grade. And also our pre-pandemic scores show again a variation in levels 3 and 4 with some change in level 1 and 2. You can also see the decrease in levels 3 and 4 in 2018 with an increase in 2019. And in 5th grade, this trend continues. You can see similarities to grade 4. And now I'm going to turn it over to Annie, who will talk about ELA at the secondary level.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Linda. So I'm going to highlight our middle school ELA scores for ESPA, and then also the scores for grade 11 SAT pertaining to ELA. So you'll see here that in grades 6 through 8, the majority of students did show mastery or they exceeded goal. Our spring data also shows that our level 1 and level 2 students have similar percentages of performance through 6th grade through 8th grade. So next, on the next slide, I'm going to take you through the comparisons for the data for the years 2017 to 2021. So in grade 6, the majority of our students met or exceeded goal at 72%. There was an increase of level 1 students comparable to 2017 and 18 academic year. but it was up 6% from 2018 to 2019 academic school year. This increase in level 2 students at 21%, which shows that many of the students that decreased from level 3 or 4 are likely into level 2. So unlike K-5, we did see a trend in middle school that there was a decrease in ELA scores, but they are not so dissimilar to 2017 or 2018. There were gains pre-pandemic, and our current scores during pandemic do show a decrease overall. You'll see the same trend if you want to go to the next slide for me, John. For grade 7, you'll notice here as well that it looks very similar to the grade 6 scores. And then if you go ahead to grade 8 for me, that it looks similar there as well. So it has been theorized through the special analysis that the state did, that the learning model had an impact on student performance. So it can be suggested that since students spent more time in the hybrid learning model than the elementary school, that we're going to see that decrease in the level 3 and 4 scores. Next slide for me, please. So grade 11 SAT scores. So what's important here to note, and you will see a decrease in the overall score. So in 2021 at 590 as the score, it's important to note that the benchmark score for the SAT reading is 480. So the benchmark score predicts that the SAT taker is going to get has a 75% chance of earning at least a C or better in their first semester of college in a discipline related to the humanities. Next slide. So what's important here to see is that 91% of our students that participated in SAT school day did score above benchmark. So, and the trends do not look dissimilar to the previous years. So now we're going to transition back to Linda with our math results and the analysis. So Linda, we'll begin with elementary.
All right, thanks, Annie. All right, so now I am going to quickly take you through the data for elementary mathematics. And again, starting with all 3 grades for the spring of 21. You will notice that the pandemic had more of an impact on mathematics than ELA in Ridgefield at the elementary level. The state reported that while academic impacts are seen in all subjects, the observed differences are largest in mathematics. And this is especially evident in Ridgefield in our grades 4 and 5, where you see the percent of students who met or exceeded goal is in the 70% range. Next slide, please, John. And here's 3rd grade comparison data from 2017 to 2019. The percentage of students who met or exceeded goal increased from year to year with limited change in the below or approaching goal. And scores are fairly consistent in terms of 2019 to 2021. And now we're going to take a look at grade 4. Next slide, John. So here we did notice a change from pre-pandemic to during pandemic. As you can see, pre-pandemic, the percentage of students who reached or exceeded goal increased from year to year. And there is a decrease this year in levels 3 and 4, with that increase in level 2. Again, this was the first year that our 4th graders took the assessment. And grade 5, next slide, John. And here's 5th grade comparison data, which is similar to grade 4, where we noticed again an increase in levels 3 and 4 pre-pandemic, with that decrease during the pandemic. And also during the pandemic, there was a percentage change more so in level 1. And now Jeff will take us through secondary mathematics, starting with middle school.
Thanks, Linda. So just to emphasize, you're going to notice a lot of common themes throughout the 6, 8, and then the high school math data. So if you look at this slide, you'll see that a majority of students do reach that 3 or 4 level in grades 6, 7, and 8. So what you will notice, if you think back to what Annie presented, is that the level of 3 or 4 is higher in ELA in these same grades in 2021. This does reflect similar behavior as we see in prior years. Next slide, please. Okay, and for grade 6, once again, you can see progress and gains were made between 2017 and 2019. But then you'll notice when we get to 2021, those gains were lost. So there is a drop in percentage of students in that level 3-4 category. And there is increases in the level 1 and 2 if you just compare the 2019 and the 2021. However, the 2021 proficiency rates really do appear to mimic the proficiency levels back in 2017. Next slide. And you'll notice in grade 7, this is a very similar trend where there is an increase in that level of 3 or 4. We've made gains from 2017 to 2019, but now in 2021, it looks like we're back into similar positions that we were in 2017. Next slide. And yet again, Math 8, we have the same pattern. So you'll notice that for middle school math for ESPA, while there were gains made from 2017 to 2019 in pre-pandemic, it does appear that many of those gains have diminished as we compare our 2021 data. Next slide, please. Okay, so now for our SAT data, you will notice, similar to Annie, that again, there was a drop in the average SAT math score in grade 11. So you'll notice that number is a 569. Pre-pandemic from 2016 to 2019, you might notice that RHS remained fairly consistent with that average SAT math score really remaining around a 600, but that 2021 number does show a decrease. Next slide, please. Now, what Annie was explaining before about the proficiency rates, this slide could be a little confusing because it is important to mention that the benchmark score for the SAT math is a 530, where the benchmark score for the SAT in English was a 480. So math does have a higher benchmark score for that component of the assessment in order to reach a level 3 or 4, again, for the reasons that Annie had mentioned. And really similar to that average score, since the redesigned SAT in 2016, Ridgefield High School has remained fairly consistent in that level 3-4 percentage category. And if you even look 2016 and 2019, they have the exact same percentage. So we have remained fairly consistent pre-pandemic, but then you'll notice in 2021, there is a decrease in level 3-4 and really a substantial increase in the level 1 numbers for 2021. Next slide, please. Okay, so in addition to English and math, we also take the next generation science standards. So just to remind you, this is a test that is given in grade 5, 8, and 11. Just as you look at this slide, you'll notice right off the bat that this is only the second year that this NGS summative assessment was given. It was not given in 2020, and it was given for the first time in 2019. This assessment measures those 3-dimensional nature of the NGSS around the shifts in education. So the instruction shifts and the assessment shifts along with it. So as we go through the next 3 slides, I want you to pay attention to one thing, and that is really the consistency between 2019 and 2021. So in grade 5, our proficiency numbers do remain fairly consistent. If you go to the next slide. All right, grade 8, you'll notice once again, the numbers are fairly consistent. And then if you go to grade 11, once again, those numbers are fairly consistent between 2019 and 2021. But I just want to emphasize again, we only have 2 data points. So we look forward to kind of administering this in the future and collecting more data to report. So now that we've actually seen the scores for 2021, Corey's going to spend some time discussing the data with regards to comparing Ridgefield scores to comparable districts.
Before I move on to that, there is one thing that I do want to say that we looked at as requested or suggested by the state of Connecticut. We did look at cohorts, and we looked at cohorts over time, pre-pandemic and then during the pandemic. And predictably, what we found was that cohorts were growing year to year. And then during the pandemic, we saw a loss of growth. So that was consistent across the grade levels. So now we're going to talk about Ridgefield by comparison. Next slide, please. So typically, in a typical year, when we get to this part of the presentation, what we do is we lay out slides for you that shows how Ridgefield compares to other school districts. We're not doing that this year. The comparison is one, really discouraged by the state of Connecticut. They understand, just like we described earlier, the conditions that students went through in the past year and a half. And those conditions have so many different factors that a cross comparison makes it very complicated. So what we really did, which you saw us do earlier, is we did look at our own comparisons, our own growth, and then we're thinking about using what we've learned from here to move us forward. And even now, as we think about this work, while we are back to normal-ish, we are still operating a single instructional model with some disruptions, as you can see from different students going into quarantine learning. So the point of this slide is to show you that we're actually not able to do those comparisons this year. And if you know my team, we did try, but there's too many factors, too many conditions. And we do agree that it is a time to really focus in on our students, where they are and what they need next. So let's move on to the next part. So next steps and conclusions. Next slide. So we anticipated what you saw in a lot of these slides. And actually we anticipated an even larger drop in many places than our students did demonstrate through these assessments. So in the spring, we took measures to prepare for this. So I'm just going to list a couple of those highlights. So across our schools at the different levels, we shored up intervention materials and made sure there was equity. We offered professional learning to all our interventionists. And then we worked to calibrate K-8, our MTSS model, and even extended that into 9th grade. At all levels, we studied what students were able to learn during the 2021 school year, and then what learning they missed. And we worked together to figure out how we could integrate those skills into the following year, which is this school year. Specifically at the high school, I don't know if you remember, but we didn't give finals, we gave diagnostics. And we gave departments all time to work together to study the results of the diagnostics to inform the courses that your students are in this school year. So that's really what people talk about when they talk about accelerating student learning, is the ability to put in missed learning into current content instead of going back and remediating. In addition, we worked on building curriculum teams over the summer. We've also mentioned the work that we've done in building the algebra lab, which is in practice right now. And we're doing the same thing in literacy, trying to figure out how we can utilize the different supports that are already in place, like the writing labs, to support students who we've identified through a variety of assessments as they left 8th grade who need support moving into 9th grade. So that was just an example of some of the ways in the spring that we were preparing to address the learning that was lost in the prior years. Next slide, please. So I'm sure you know what we're doing now. We're using a combination of formative and summative assessments to continue to inform our instruction, our pacing, and the support. This includes our universal screeners in grades K through 8, any other assessments, curriculum-based and observational assessments. This work is led by curriculum department leaders and building administrators. And really what it's allowing us to do is make adjustments as we go to best meet the needs of our students. So that's a sample of what we're doing now. So the next slide, please. How are we preparing for the future? So one of the things that we have learned, and I know that our teachers have demonstrated and our administrators have supported, is that we can be flexible. I think we're tired of the word pivot, but we really are flexible. And in the moment, we can learn to quickly implement and adjust. So preparing for the future, we are ready for that and confident that we can make those adjustments. We are making revisions on assessments and making sure that those assessments are meeting students where they are and providing us with the information that we need to best address them. We continue to work on standard alignment across schools in a level and across levels. And we're also consistently reviewing, and possibly renewing curriculum resources to make sure that they are best supporting our students as they are learning and filling in those gaps. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, while we are not formally fully back to our traditional model, we are using this ability and this confidence to adjust, to study, to respond, and we will continue to do so as we move forward. So tonight, what we did was we gave you a quick summary of the information that we gleaned from the state assessments. They're not the most comprehensive. They don't provide the most comprehensive data, but they are useful when used in concert with all the other information that we have about our students. So we hope this gave you some idea of how our students performed, where we are, what kind of assessments they took, and we're ready for your questions.
Sean?
Let me preface this with just a background question. Looking at these diagrams, we've combined 3 and 4 together. We have as a district, a problem identifying and helping high flyers as well as the bottom end of the spectrum. Why did we combine 3 and 4, and why can't we break those out so we can see where the actual challenge lies within basically 80+% of our district?
Traditionally, that's how the data is presented to school districts, but we're happy to do that. We have that.
I think we need to do that. It's hard to discern anything when you're putting 80+% of the district in one bucket and saying they're all the same, because they're not.
At the school
make sense?
level, at the school level, Sean, when data teams do look at this data, they actually, again, I want to preface this year's data, perhaps not in the same way as in other years, but they do look at the student level reports as well and the information that's coming from there. So in addition to the level, the 3, the 2, the 1, the 4, they look at what's actually in the report, identify what students' strengths are, what students' challenges are,
I appreciate that you're doing that on an individual basis, and that's important. But we as a board, the information you've given on this report, as a data monkey myself, is all but useless because you didn't break those 2 categories out. The vast majority of our students are lumped into one category and put as same, and that's troubling and really difficult to discern anything from it. Does that make sense?
Good enough. What we can do for the board is we can send you a follow-up with those 2 numbers broken down.
Sure.
Yeah, it's obvious that learning loss is a thing. We can measure it, but I can't see where it's a thing because all of our students, the vast majority, are lumped in together, and it doesn't mean anything now. I'll leave it at that for now.
Ken, do you want me to call it? Okay.
So I saw you too, Rachel.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my thoughts together. Too much medication. First, I think I was surprised. I do want to call out the kids and the teachers who I really expected lower numbers. So for what it's worth, for the toughest years these kids have been through, even for one of the tests, I mean, I know it's one data point, they still did, God bless these kids. They still did not drop the way I expected it to drop. So I have to give a big shout out to the kids who took it, to the parents and the teachers who worked hard with them in the most toughest of circumstances. Nobody enjoyed this. So hopefully going forward, this doesn't happen anymore. I kind of agree with Sean about the 3 and 4, but I also am concerned that we still seem to have a huge loss or a big number still growing. And again, I agree, it's one data point, but the kids who are in the lower level, right? And as we keep talking about addressing the entire child, as a parent, we sit on the board, I understand all the different measures you take, but there are parents who are just joining in, who are new to this district, who want to understand what measures you take to address these kids. What is the district or the teachers or the administration doing to bring the 1s and 2s to the 3s and 4s? So I think it will really help if you can highlight what we do as a district. I know we've had some emails come to the board why we have NWA testing, why MAP testing is important. What is that used for? I think it'll really benefit the board and the parents who watch these meetings if you could bring that to one of the board meetings to explain how this is, again, another data point. And this is what we do if we do have children who are the lower end, for lack of a better word. And I'm using a data point, not their intellectual or capacity. I'm just using the data point. And this is what we're doing to get them there, because parents tend to see that as a reflection of how a child is doing. And as I look at these numbers, I have to ask, because I have a sophomore and I'm not bringing my sophomore is doing well. The current sophomores and juniors did not have a standard, like a test for a state test. There is a loss there. So I'm hoping as we go forward, you are continuing to keep those 2 grades too, because they will, the current juniors they were sophomores last year, they will be taking the SATs. The current freshmen who did have a huge loss at the end of 8th grade when everything shut down, there are issues in algebra, they will be taking the PSATs for the first time. So there's another loss. So I hope you continue to keep those kids in mind. And my last point, I promise, because I'm going to start coughing again, as we talk about all this data point, I hope we're also keeping the mental health of all these kids in mind, because, it has been a rough year. It continues still to be uncertain, quarantine, not quarantine, depending on the level you are. We don't know what 2 months will bring, So all this, I hope we still continue to keep mental health in mind. And I would really like, as a board member, even want to understand, and I think Liz has brought this up, if there are any metrics we use to keep mental, what do we do to know that these kids are doing well beyond their grades? Anything you do, whatever you do, as a board member, I echo what Liz has said a few times before. I would like to see what we do as a district, and it helps parents understand what we're doing, instead of just using the words mental health.
Sure. So I'm hearing that one of the topics that you would like to hear more about is our response to intervention program, our NPSS program, and what data we use, a variety of different data to identify students when they're struggling, and how we do use really NWEA, also called MAPS. So sometimes it's confusing because it's 2 acronyms are used, it's only one. That with how we use that one standardized assessment that we give in grades 2 through 8 to 3 times a year to identify students, to make sure that they're making progress. And then there's a whole plan that is put in place on either end when students are exceeding and need more enrichment, or when students struggle and need more support. So I'm hearing that that's something that you're interested in learning more about. And just to reiterate, at the middle school and high school level, the work that we did this spring was exactly what you mentioned. It was using the assessments from the spring to design the courses for the fall, the next level course up. So the term that's being used in our field right now is acceleration. And really the idea is identifying missed learning from the previous course and integrating it into the current course, so that you're not reteaching everything, but you're just identifying those key standards and weaving them into the next year's course content.
All right, I think Rachel had a question.
Thank you so much for that report. I have a couple of questions. So my first one is, first of all, I definitely believe about teaching the whole child and looking at the whole child. And I understand this is just one data point, but I'm thinking ahead to our budget. And I want to be supportive, and I want to be supportive in our math curriculum. So I was wondering if we could bring back maybe, and thinking of specifically grades 4 and 5, what tools or resources are we using, and how can we better support all learners as we move forward this year, next year, and then the alignment to the secondary level? I know we've talked about that in curriculum committee meetings. It's so important. So that's my first question. My second question has to do with that. On the 6 to 8 scores here, any professional learning days may be ahead that may focus on how to best support students moving forward, especially in mathematics. Again, resources for the kids. And then I have a couple more. So in regard to the ELA scores and the math scores, I know the test is adaptive, but I was just wondering, does the bank of questions change at all? I was wondering if maybe some years it's just a harder test than other years. I know in New York State, it was definitely harder some years than others in the secondary level. And then the main reason for the students taking the SBOT is to inform how we're teaching the students. Is that the main reason for it? Or do we use it for placement on the secondary level? So,
That was a lot of questions, Rachel.
sorry.
This is a test for Chloe.
Okay, wait, I can do it. So everything that the state told us, it's the same test. It's not a different test.
Okay.
Yes, I know the New York test, and it does vary from year to year, but from what I understand from this test, it's the same test. And I'm not going to know exactly how adaptive it is, but it doesn't span multiple years, the adaptiveness of the Smarter Balance assessment at this point. So it's not highly adaptive. Math alignment, work in math alignment. Yes, math continues to be a growth area and a study area for us through the elementary all the way up. And I think that the math lab is evidence of that in mathematics, secondary mathematics, the role of algebra and building that foundation is just as important as that early reading foundation building that we focused on with phonemic awareness resources at the primary level. So that the role of algebra and the importance of algebra, and I have to give Jeff Corbishley a lot of credit because he really brought that to my attention, is something that we are spending a lot of time focusing on. So one way we're doing that is identifying students going into Algebra 1 who need additional help and providing them with a math lab. That group of math lab teachers meets with Jeff and with their department chair regularly, really developing what that intervention program looks like at the high school level. Students move in based on certain criteria and then can move out of that additional support. In addition, the other role that Jeff is playing is he's supporting the math interventionists and coaches at the middle school level. This is the first time since those positions were created that those individuals are not also teaching core classes. So what we've made sure is that the people who have the most specialized skills for teaching students who struggle in mathematics are now, that's their full schedule, in addition to a little bit of math coaching for their colleagues. And Jeff is working with them to support them on that. And there is some additional support from a Title I teacher who's supporting both elementary schools. At the middle school level, Linda can tell you, we're continuing to study mathematics and the implementation of the curriculum that's been created that was here before us. That is pretty soon going to be something that you're going to hear us talking about as we get that committee together and start to do that work. Your last question, I think I missed. Why to teach? I'm not sure which one.
Why are we using ESPA? What do we use it for?
Okay, thank you. Well, remember, we're required to administer the Smarter Balance assessment. So we do our best to use the data as best as we can. So it does help us, especially when you have multiple schools across a level, to assess implementation of curriculum resources. So it does give us that information. And it does give us, like we said, another data point for individuals. It is broken out in several different categories across English language arts and mathematics. It doesn't give us a ton of information, but it does give us some area. We are not going to be using the Smarter Balance assessment for math placement this year. I think this presentation should illustrate that, right? The conditions in which students took this assessment. I know that it has, prior to us, been used. It is not going to be used this year. So I hope I got your list.
Yeah, no, you did. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
great.
And then just so the resources that we're using for mathematics, that's something that'll come back to the board then at some point of what
Right.
we're using. As I understand, there's a difference between curriculum and then resources.
Yes. Yes,
Right.
the curriculum resource, right. So the curriculum resource that we're using at the elementary level is Math and Focus, and at the middle school level, it's Big Ideas. And Jeff has already engaged in professional development with Big Ideas and the teachers on the 26th. from our I think it is true that when they implemented the new resource, it was the first year that we went home. So teachers didn't have a full year of support with that new resource. So Jeff has already identified areas of need for teachers, and they're getting that support. In addition, Jeff and Linda Johnson are working on supporting our coaches and our math interventionists with a math educator who's going to come in and work with them once or twice in the next month or two, I believe.
And I think your question, Rachel, may, or maybe it's not, rooted in, we do have a primary resource, and there's no one better to speak to that than Linda Johnson, who obviously is intimately involved here at the elementary level, but has been working with mathematics for a majority of her career, elementary mathematics. While our primary resource is Math in Focus, that primary resource is quite old. It's a 2013 version. So we will be looking at whether or not this is a resource shift completely, or a version shift, or what it needs to look like in the coming years, because quite frankly, it's hard to even purchase the resource, and you'd be surprised at how expensive an old book is. You'd be really surprised. It's almost as expensive as a new book for a student workbook, but may actually be more. But that is an area that I know Linda, alongside Corey, will be looking at, and I think you'll hear more about that in the coming months.
Thank you so much.
Was that getting at the root of your question, Rachel, around mathematics?
I want to make sure that, our children and all types of learners just have the resources that they need going forward to make them the best possible mathematician that they could be. Thank you.
Is that Liz?
Can you guys hear me? I'm having some audio challenges.
Yes,
okay, thank you. So thank you for walking through the numbers, and as I usually do, I'd love to see the resolutions and those plans that you've laid out verbally, sort of laid out with how do we know they're working. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that we see learning loss in this data. We all knew that was coming. And so I guess my comment is just, one, it would be really good to see what are the mitigation and interventions and how are we testing those, so that we don't have kids that have to wait while we evaluate a new curriculum, or wait while we figure it out because they're learning along the way or not. And I love the idea of the acceleration, where you're putting in pieces of the curriculum that was missed. I think that's a really sound, it seems like a sound practice from a non-practitioner, let's just say. And I think it's a really great way to address this, and I hope it works effectively for the kids. My comment is more around the agenda item we're about to talk about with our goals as a district. It's clear to me as a parent and as a Board of Ed member that this should be our priority, and that we have 4 pages of metrics and priorities that we're going to review next in this agenda. And my recommendation is, our first order of business is to close the gaps on not just the scores, but the learning loss that these kids have encountered over the last 18 months. It's been longer than a year. We keep saying it's a year. It's much longer than that. They're still in a non-normal situation. There's still adjustments being made. There's still kids going on quarantine and having passive learning activities. So I would just caution and say, as a district, this academic slide should be our number 1 priority. And if we can't get kids safe and learning actively and filling in the 18 months of learning loss that they've had, we have failed as an educator, as an education community. The SAT scores dropping by all of those points, that's a big deal. These kids don't have time to make that up. If they may have dreams to go to college, they may not, but the SAT has a big weight on that. And so I just say, when we go into that next agenda item, boy, academic success and resetting these kids has better be not diluted with 45 other things, because this should be what you guys have time and energy to focus on, and should be it, frankly, for the next year. So I'll just pause there. Thank you.
And not to give too much away, Liz, but we will be going through the goals as you pointed out.
Yeah.
And actually our first goal, based on the conversation we had prior in our prior meeting, is to ensure that the district resources are prioritized to remedy pandemic-related losses.
Yeah,
So,
and I think that's nice. And I think we should probably think about how much can we remove from the rest of those pages so that that really is the priority as we get into budget discussions, as we get into trade-offs on time and energy that teachers and administrators have. My point is absolutely, Ken, I appreciate that that's the first one on there. Maybe it needs to be one of 3 instead of one of 40. So thank you.
Yep. I think Tina had another point.
Yes, sorry. It's just going back onto what Rachel said, and it kind of links to what Liz said. I mean, we know middle school parents are always focused on the math pathways, if you will, right? Because depending on where they are, this is, it really kind of somehow or kind of leans towards what they can take in high school math. So as we look into learning loss, as we look into these kids, I hope that you're looking into even the math pathways, right? Because as I remember, there were stringent ways or 4 data points or whatever they were to get into X math pathways. They keep changing. I'm an involved parent, and I get confused with what the requirements were. So as we look into this, as we look into changing our resources, and to echo what Liz and Rachel are saying, when we're looking about the entire child, I hope we're looking at those math pathways, so to speak, for middle school and how we can be somewhat flexible. You know, there are kids who could have had huge loss and completely peak in 8th grade, but then it's probably too late because they've lost a lot of core content from 7th and 6th grade. So as we develop this, we look at board goals. I think this is something we need to keep in mind, because these are kids, and I think Liz said it well, if they lose 1 year, they lose 1 year. If 8th grade's gone or 7th grade's gone, it's gone. And that's a huge content area loss, if you will. And yes, they can double up in high school, I understand that, but it's some kids it's just not possible because there's so many electives and they want to do so much. So I want to highlight those kids too.
Agreed. Okay, it doesn't look like there are any more questions from the board. Is there anything else, Dr. De Silva, on this before we move on?
Yeah, so I think what you all did tonight by giving us feedback on what matters most to each of you individually and perhaps collectively as a board, I think we all agree. And Liz Flogel, when she illustrated you have 40 things right listed, what matters most, I can tell you for sure that the team that presented tonight, the biggest part of our discussion daily is how are our students doing and what are we doing differently to support them. And so while there's lots of other work happening, and you can, if you read carefully into each of our district priorities, which we'll talk again in a minute about, or a little bit later tonight about, you'll see that that's evidenced in there, whether it's looking at the curriculum and having it available for teachers, whether it's looking at our MTSS process, which cannot be underestimated in how we support kids. Whether it's a universal screener, yes, we use NWEA and MAP for 2 and up, but we also use Ames Web for our primary students. We have concrete unit assessments. We're collecting that data. We are in the process of having very clear benchmark data and assessment windows so we can look at our students individually and then collectively alongside our curriculum so we can make the adjustments, whether it's to move along or slow it down or readjust and look at the intervention supports that we have. As we're meeting with our leadership team is meeting with our school-based teams, we're not just meeting with our principals, we're meeting with their leadership teams. And oftentimes the individuals that they're bringing into the room are those individuals that are supporting kids, whether it's the coaches or the interventionists. So leadership doesn't look just like the people that are sitting on the screen tonight, but it's the ones that are leading the work with children directly through MTSS. So I'm also hearing, I think, from this board that it could be helpful to have a presentation, if not in the near future, in the coming months, around MTSS. What does that structure look like? What does that data look like? How do we collect it? How does it inform the work that we do with students? Again, individually, small group, or collectively. That's my takeaway from the conversation that we're having this evening. And again, this is a moment in time when we all know what the past year and a half has been like for our students. And so we're taking this information and we're learning from it. And there were a lot of variables that influenced how our students performed, whether that was where they actually took the assessment, how engaged they were, whether or not they were home for the majority of the time, whether or not they were in school. So a lot of variables, and the best that we can do for our students now, give them their time to readjust, assess them in authentic and meaningful ways, collect that information, and intervene as quickly as we can.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Vasilva.
Thank you.
I think with that, we'll move on to the school readiness and capital projects. Are you going to tee Joe up on that, or is he going to jump right in?
So I will tee Joe up briefly in that I apologize to the board that we didn't get that presentation to you a little bit earlier. There were a lot of photos that we were still taking and making some adjustments. So you'll see that for the first time here tonight. It's not a presentation that I think is new for the board members that have been with us for a couple of years. So this is something that Joe presents just around this time of the year to give you an update on the work that's been happening outside of the academic side, but certainly influences the academic side. So John Mansfield, you ready to lift that presentation up for Joe?
There we go. Thank you, Dr. De Silva. So as you know, this is always the presentation of how I spent my summer. And as I get started, I have to give special thanks to my group of maintainers and custodians who faced a lot of challenges this summer. It was an even more unusual summer than last summer, even though we didn't bend a single piece of plexiglass this summer. We still had our share of challenges. John, next slide. So in talking with my counterparts in other districts, and we were all in the same boat, the supply chain issues basically crippled us this summer with the delivery of our project completions. For the most part, lead times on deliveries were crucial. We saw a lot of the projects affected by that. We also saw pricing increases on things that I had budgeted for on the operating side as well as the capital side. And one in particular, Farmingville's well infrastructure project, the tank itself was a 300% increase. So we had to do a lot of manipulating of the project to get that all in on budget. We also were faced with a lot of the contractors dealt with staffing deficiencies, and that tied things up. They just didn't have enough staffing to meet a lot of the schedules, and we had to kind of keep pushing things off. And every year we deal with ESY. We do a good job keeping Scotts Ridge and Barlow on track. This year the bridge was a new wrinkle, but we did get it done. We did have to schedule around the bridge time slots, but for the most part we did get all that done. So that being said, the majority of the projects to varying degrees were affected. The security vestibules that we had planned for Scotland and Branchville, we saw tremendous lead times on the extruded aluminum and some of the hardware things. So we had to kind of shift gears, and we need to regroup on that and schedule that for a later date, probably the summer of 22. The East Ridge generator, another capital project, again, a tremendous lead time on the transfer switch and some of the peripherals that went along with that. So that will be coming on in the later months. We were hoping to get it done this summer, but it's just, we couldn't do it. The same with the anti-intrusion barriers from the capital side. Those were coming out of the Midwest. And again, the logistics delays were critical. We also had to push off the staff bathroom renovations at VP because the student bathroom, the lead times and the back order of the tiles kind of pushed us right to the last couple of days right before school started. So we couldn't accomplish those. So we will tackle those over February break. John, next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of some of the projects. This just touches the surface of it by school. I won't go through all of it to save time, but just some of the key points. The alternatives high school, we did a major building makeover on that. Working with Dr. De Silva, Dr. Hanaway, we laid out a plan to go in, remodel basically the whole building from the outside in. The high school, the biggest project there was the solar installation. As Kathleen alluded to, we're waiting on Eversource to do their final walkthrough on that. You'll see in the pictures, the roof is pretty much covered with solar panels. So I'm kind of anxious to see what the outcome of that's going to be, because it is tied into the main distribution panel service for the old portion of the high school, which, as we know from past studies, is 60% of the demand for that building, as well as the electric heat that goes along with it. East Ridge, we did a significant bathroom remodel renovations. For those that did some of the walkthroughs, they know the condition those bathrooms were in. These are the first two bathrooms as you come in through the vestibule by the guard station, and you'll see those in the pictures. And the transformation was incredible. Scotts Ridge, we refinished the gym floor. That was the original gym floor. So it had about 20 years of amber on the finish, and we finally just got to taking it down, restriping it, and it's brand new again. Barlow Mountain, front sidewalk replacement. Branchville, asbestos abatement, floor retiling. That was the second phase going on the capital side. Farmingville, we did the well infrastructure, which was on the Capitol, as well as an accessible sidewalk to the primary playground. Ridgebury, another solar installation that is online, as Kathleen alluded to. We did some carpet replacement in the front office and the adjacent offices. Scotland, we finally finished the asbestos. I'm glad to report we're done with it. And it's been a long time, but it's done, and we can move forward with other projects in that school. The LED lighting, they're wrapping that up, I believe, in the next week. And again, it makes the hallways pop, and it's just a great energy savings. Veterans Park, we did the 2 student bathrooms on the primary side to finish off their bathroom renovations. We also did a complete makeover, so to speak, of the portables for the 18 to 22 group. The town was kind enough to re-side the building, and we worked on the inside with new carpeting and putting in new windows. Next slide, John. So we get into pictures here. The first slide here, Ridgefield Alternative High School, you can see the kitchen renovation. It's dramatic. I wish I had a picture of it before with all the cabinets, but Dr. De Silva can attest that it was in definite need of a makeover. And so there's what it looks like now in the after picture. We also did carpet replacement inside on both levels of the educational space, as well as vinyl tile on the entranceways and in the common areas. And the building makeover, we had the building completely painted. We did work on the chimney, restoration work on the chimney. We did a considerable amount of landscaping, removing a lot of the overgrowth of bushes and shrubs, reworked the pathways and the patio. And the residents there at Ballard Green, every time they'd walk by, they were just amazed at the transformation. Next, John, please. So there is the solar array installation on the roof of the high school. It covers just about 3/4 of the high school roof space. And we have the inverters, picture of all the inverters lined up there. It's all piped in and ready to go, waiting for Eversource. We also did staff bathrooms on the 3rd floor, I believe B wing. These are just some pictures just showing the transformation there from the old block to the new tile and the cleaner look. Next slide, John. East Ridge, I think this was the most exciting project of the whole summer because it was so dramatic in its transformation. And again, if you were able to do the walkthroughs, you know how bad these bathrooms were. And my hat's off to Brett Metters, my maintenance supervisor. He saw this on Pinterest, believe it or not, and made reality out of it. He worked with the contractors to get the tiles and the right look, and all new LED lighting, all new fixtures, all new tile, and it's very, very clean looking space. Another project at East Ridge, Project Adventure, the outdoor course, we had to remove 7 diseased ash trees, which were integral. Some of those were integral to the course itself, because there were a lot of guide wires and support wires that were attached to those trees. We had to take those trees down and clear as much of the land there as possible. And we got 2 new poles that should be going in the next couple of weeks. And then there'll be Project Adventure, that group that comes in will be able to string up all their apparatus and get that course back running again. Next slide, John. Scotts Ridge has come some pictures of the gym floor, before quite ambered, as I said, from 20 years of use. And the after picture, you see the new finish, the new lines. We're waiting on the center court decal. That should be coming any day now, hopefully. And then the library learning commons got a new carpet installation. If you remember from the walkthroughs, there was a lot of trip hazards, a lot of torn carpet. So we removed all of that. And as you can see, we in the after picture, we actually used the same type of carpet tile and style that we did at the high school. And that's the finished product. And it really richened up the space. John, next slide. The town was busy with their sidewalks all summer. We took great advantage of all that. The high school, Farmingville, East Ridge, Barlow, the old stamped concrete walkway that had a number of trip hazards. We were finally able to get that in. We also worked with the town to improve the drainage to help with the atrium there. We still struggled with we had it about 99% dry, but we still had some seepage under the door. We worked the pitch of the sidewalk and added drainage, and hopefully that will take the whole drainage issue and make it the thing of the past. Next slide, John. The well infrastructure. Again, this was the capital project. The state mandated that all pressurized tanks on water delivery services be removed. And what we now have is a large storage tank. And that was the piece of equipment that we saw the 300% price increase. And this is just some of the work that had to go in to landing that tank. We had to work in the well pit, make the opening bigger, and all the excavation that went along with it. They are ready to tie in. As of the last week, they were putting in the new pumps. Ironically, the same day that we had to close the school for no water, but it had nothing to do with that work. Next slide. Ridgeberry, I apologize, I don't have a picture of the solar array, but we did add a 60-foot front sidewalk extension. And again, for Jamie Palladino, this way he can load and unload buses a little quicker. He can add another bus to the mix there. We also did the carpet replacement in the front office and the adjacent offices. Again, it was original carpet with the renovations, and a lot of trip hazards and a lot of lost adhesion. And so we finally switched to the carpet tiles going forward. Next slide, John. Scotland, we finally finished. It was many, many years in the making, but we finally finished the asbestos abatement and retiling. That just gives you kind of a look at what the finished product looks like. The LED lighting, they're just about ready to wrap up. Again, this is the same type of lighting that we did at Ridgebury as well as Branchville. The picture doesn't do it justice, but if you get a chance to go down the hallways in Scotland, there you'll see quite a marked improvement. John, next slide. Veterans Park, student girls bathroom. There's the before picture. Again, if you happen to see that on the walkthroughs, very dated. Probably most of it original with the school. We went in, we gutted it, new ceiling, had to open the walls, put all brand new piping in. Next slide, John. And here's the finished product. The guys putting the partitions up. I took that picture before. There are mirrors. We just took that picture before the mirrors went up. But you can see it's a much cleaner look, much more modern LED lighting, new, much brighter, and just very inviting and much better looking than what it was. Next slide. And the same for the boys' bathroom, although this turned into a project and a half because as you can see, we had floor mounted urinals, again, very typical of a 1950s, 1960s school. So we had to remove 2 of those. We had to remove them all, but we also had to cap off 2 to make way for a larger handicap accessible stall. The floor had to be re-poured in certain areas. Again, the walls had to be open. We had to do a significant amount of repiping, getting rid of a lot of the old galvanized pipe. And you can see there my guy, Mike LaPriore, who loves playing with cement and blocking up the wall. Next slide, John. And that's what it looks like. It's quite a difference, very dramatic. Again, very inviting, very bright, clean, very modern. And that's it. John, next slide. So with that concludes. And again, I want to thank the board for their support for both on the operating budget side and the capital side, because without your support, we couldn't do these projects. And again, this picture here just is the front sidewalk at the high school, getting ready, getting formed out and getting ready to pour this summer. So that's it. So if there's any questions, I'd be glad to take them.
Anyone on the board have questions for Joe? Sean?
Oh, of
I
course.
just say that's a lot of work, Joe. Well done.
Thank you. In a short amount of time.
I always have questions for Joe.
Yeah.
First of all, I don't think I've ever seen that many projects in one summer. Congratulations on that. And I didn't think that Ridgefield Public Schools and Pinterest would ever be said in the same sentence, but here we are.
I agree.
Congratulations on that. I sent you pictures of the East Ridge steps, those really expensive steps that took us 3 years to get to. Have those gotten worse, better? Where are those at?
Again, the town is aware of it. It was an issue with the pour. I know when I talked with Jake from the town on the town side there, he identified, I believe he identified it as an issue with the pour, the mixture. So I know he has been in contact with the construction company, but I can follow up.
That took a long time and a lot of money, and we can't let that go like we do with our roads here in town. We talk a lot about trip hazards in here. How does VP front entrance look these days?
Better.
Are you talking on the parking lot side?
I'm talking about the front entrance.
Yeah, on the bus side.
On the
Sean,
bus.
Yep.
Yeah, we had highway come out and they did some restorative work there and finished up, filled those potholes up and those depressions. But it is a drainage issue, and I know the highway needs to get back there and rework that a little bit more.
Okay, and one last one that I'll sound like a broken record. What are we doing about HVAC in our schools?
Keeping them running.
That's not what is required, and that's not what our charter should be.
as far as, I mean, are you talking COVID protocol or?
I'm talking about improving the ventilation in our schools for COVID protocol and beyond. We're behind the curve on it already, and this only made it worse. And I feel like, leaving windows open and letting it run 24/7 is not the long-term solution here, but here we are.
It isn't. And dealing with the state, with the older schools, that is the only recommendation really, short of putting in major air conditioning and infrastructure. What we've done, we've spent a lot of time on the building exhaust side, upgrading those to direct drive and improving all of that exhaust infrastructure throughout the district. The capital plan, we're also, as you'll see this November, a lot of the HVAC, the rooftop units are now moved up on the capital side. I'm in the process
with
of hiring,
$8 million in ARPA funds. How much have we asked the town for?
Sean, I can answer that. At this point, I'm not sure that the town has recircled around how that money is going to be spent. I think it's a little bit shy of $8 million. But at this point, the committee has not come back together for input.
Have we asked for that? Have we specifically asked for support for improving the HVAC in our schools?
With respect to ARPA funds?
Yep.
No, we have not.
Can we? Should we?
We can, should we? Perhaps. I think there are other priorities as well around ADA compliance that I think is important as well. We're looking at any funding that we might receive. If we receive support from the town, I could see both of those being of importance. And I'm sure that the town has priorities as well, but certainly from our perspective, ADA, HVAC, a few others.
But if we don't put HVAC on the list, it's never going to happen. I think we're pretty clear on that. It's not just going to organically pop to the top of the list. And one last one for you, Joe. I love all the new solar panels on the roofs, but those are flat roofs. What happens when we get 2 feet of snow?
You must have overheard my comment this morning when I was up on the roof.
I didn't, but as somebody who's flown drones over these and taken pictures of them, I know how this works, and it's absolutely a loaded question.
And it's a perfect time for Joe to lose service. And it's a loaded question. Yes, it is. Joe, you froze a minute.
I didn't, sorry.
Yeah, you froze.
I did?
Yep, go ahead.
Yep.
Try one more time. It was a perfect time to freeze, but you did.
So I do know the town did all their diligence and engineering. But I share the same concerns you do.
So and this is just a layperson's recommendation, is we need to take a look at those things before, during, and after storms to make sure they're cleared. And you can't shovel solar panels. That's just not a thing.
No, you can't. No, it'll be interesting and to see this winter how they fare.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions from the board? Hi, Liz.
A real quick question, and this might be a bit of a bogey. How much damage have we seen in the high school bathrooms as a result of poor decision-making by youths?
Yeah, actually a little bit early on, and actually a little bit at the middle school and even a little bit at the elementary school. It's unfortunate that that kids can be that easily persuaded to make those kinds of decisions. At the end of the day, Liz, they were moments in time, thankfully, and not anything that was incredibly significant. I think our students learned very quickly, and our principals were proactive in communicating out to those individuals and understanding and helping families understand the impact and the disciplinary consequence of those types of behaviors.
Thank you.
But I think the greater concern is how quickly our kids can be influenced by an outside source.
Okay. Rachel, I think I saw your hand.
I was just going to make a suggestion. It might be a good idea if when we have our tri-board meeting, it's usually in the fall, to have on the agenda, going back to Sean's point, maybe the Board of Selectmen saying, well, these are the priorities of the town, and these are some priorities that we have as a school district that we would like to see the ARPA funds used for. It could be a good conversation. That way we can get everything out on the table.
Rachel, originally, and again, it was put to a halt, and I'm not sure that I understand why, but we did have representative membership from the Board of Education on the committee. It was Tina and Ken from the Board of Ed side, as well as myself. There was representatives from the Board of Selectmen and a representative from the Board of Finance. I think they were looking at the committee structure and were intending to circle back, but and I'm not sure yet.
Okay. It just might be a good,
Yeah.
good idea to come back and convene as a whole.
Great idea. Any other questions from the board? Anything else for us, Joe?
That's it for now. Stay tuned.
All right, we will. We definitely will. All right, so our next agenda item is the Board of Education goals. These were actually not included in the packet. And I think Dr. De Silva, is John
Yes,
going to put them
John
up?
Mansfield is going to share the screen. And these are hot off the press. As you might remember, Jonathan said he was going to work on these and he was traveling. So
I have them open. That was mine. And so as the board remembers, we had a discussion, I guess it would have been 2 weeks ago, at our last Board of Education meeting. And these are the changes have been incorporated here. The first 3 paragraphs are identical. It's the bottom 5 goals. And they do actually run over into that second page, John. As I had mentioned earlier, the first goal we have is ensuring the district resources are prioritized to remedy pandemic-related losses. Our second goal would become an employer of choice for highly qualified educators. Third goal is promote and practice good stewardship for all direct resources in a manner that supports a safe and healthy environment, which optimizes student learning. Fourth goal there, develop RPS policies in support of the attainment of the district's strategic outcomes, mission, and vision of the graduate. And that goal 5 is a combination of 2 of our prior goals, because we still think it's important to continue improving the accountability and the communication between the board, the administration, as well as all of our stakeholders, the students, parents, and the community at large. And that's the improving accountability and the communication. So just, again, I want to open up the discussion to the board at large. We want to make sure that we have incorporated all of the salient points of our discussion from 2 weeks ago. If there are any changes or improvements that the board would like to see. Again, these are our goals, in support of the district's goals. And I can see even less of us. Does anyone have any questions or comments? I see none. Rachel, do we need a motion for these? Would we adopt them at this point in time? I do know that we're missing two of our members. So is that? I think maybe we wait until we have the full board.
I think this would go back, Ken, because in reality, it's a first read because the adjustments hadn't been made yet. So I think we can bring this one back for a second read. And I made one small edit, and I'm sure Jonathan will bring this back for our next meeting in
Perfect.
October.
That sounds good to me. First read. All right. And so that'll bring us to our next agenda item. And let's Dr. De Silva talk about our district priorities.
You got it. So now this is the second read. The last time we were together, you all provided feedback. Some of what we heard was to look at the outcomes and add some more measurable ways into identifying what outcomes we would expect from each action step. There were a couple of minor edits that we were shifting. One in particular was around looking at the options for parents for morning care, respective of the challenges that some of our families have faced. That was in 2 sections, so we removed one of them. The electric buses and the idea of studying that, I think I heard from the board that in terms of priorities for next school year, it really needed to take a back seat to other items around transportation, so we removed that. Dr. Hanaway wasn't here, but there was a goal around co-teaching. You'll actually hear more about that particular goal in the coming months around special education and the state of special education, and giving you some more insight on whether or not that particular goal is one that we can actually operationalize as it's intended to be. Outside of that, just one point I wanted to mention, as I heard Liz Flogel and many of you share tonight about your concern around too many things and are we prioritizing? If you read carefully, and I know that this is a practitioner document, but if you read carefully, in particular, I'd like to highlight, I think on page 4 and 5, when we talk about the structures around MTSS and universal screeners and identifying a criteria for support. I think for someone that's looking at that from the outside, they may not understand the significance of that, but it really is significant. And the reason I say that it's because that is the way in which we measure how our students are performing over time. Again, that happens to be 3 times a year, but there's lots of ways in between. But it also pushes us to say, okay, this is the criteria in which we're going to use to start supporting kids and transitioning students from one tier of support to possibly another. It also indicates to us when a student perhaps needs to exit. It also gives us feedback on how our scope and sequence and our curriculum resources are working for our students and whether or not we may need to make adjustments. So while it's buried in there with a lot of other things, there's a real loftiness to that priority that I don't want us to lose sight over. But what I also heard tonight is I think that this board needs to hear from our curriculum team specifically around how we support kids. What do these assessments look like? What do the structures look like? And a lot of the priorities really are around systems and structures that we talked about. All of our budget season last year was creating a foundation for support, creating systems and structures, having curriculum available to teachers that they can actually access, that it's there written for them. Similarly, having those resources available to families. And so it may not seem at first glance that this isn't really, that these priorities in teaching and learning specifically aren't really focused on supporting kids in a pandemic, but they actually really are. And they are because they set the foundation, they create systems and structures so that we don't miss a student throughout this process. And there's also another population of students that I think Sean spoke to when he asked us to divide that level 3 and 4, the advanced group versus the proficient group, and be sure that we're meeting all kids' needs on the continuum of learning. And learning differences span, as we know, across many levels. And so I don't want any of us to underestimate how heavy the lift that teaching and learning has around supporting students. And I hope that what we can do a really good job of this year, and I think the curriculum team set the stage for that tonight, is coming back to the Board of Education and updating the board often enough that you can see how this work is coming to life in our schools. And I do think that we've done a good job so far in doing that, whether it's through the curriculum committee and or here, but we're going to continue to do that throughout the course of the year. The next time that we have our Board of Education meeting, I think we'll have our timeline. So you should be able to see how these things will come to life between now and June. And so that's really it for the district priorities. We cleaned it up a little bit. We took all your feedback. We removed what didn't belong, at least not for right now. Doesn't mean that's not going to belong at some point, but not right now. And I think we have a good working document. Plenty to do. I think we, in some ways may have bitten off a little bit too much, but I have full confidence that this team can do it. And we're going to work hard in the spirit of that. I'll take any questions.
Any questions from the board? Any comments? Let's see. I have to switch views to Tina. I don't see any. Okay, there being none, let's jump into our policies. Okay, this will be a first read for these policies. We will have to, they will come back for a second read, at which point we will vote to adopt them. And
so, Ken, would it be helpful? We have the first two, I believe, are technology.
They are.
Yep.
Would it be helpful if the board asks questions, or would you like perhaps, Wes, do you want to highlight any key points? I don't think you need to go through the whole policy, but Margaret's not tonight, so
Yeah.
Would do this.
Wes,
Sure.
go through that. The policy committee did get all of the details, so we got to hear Wes do his deep dive in. Again, he has everything at the ready for any questions.
Yeah, I'll just do a quick whistle stop tour. Both these policies, both these policies are replacing very old policies that were very granular and they were very specific. All these policies, whether they're from Cave or Shipman and Goodwin, we did rewrite a lot of things and we focus more on behaviors rather than actual granular, like taking a photo, posting it, doing this. It's more of like, are you harassing, or are you using board technology for, poor purposes and so on. And we went through, we offloaded some of the really granular stuff to the handbook. That way, if we want to change something like a new rival to TikTok pops up that does something weird and different that we can't predict, we just say in the policy or as permissible in the handbook. So that gives us some leeway with that. But yeah, I'm open for any questions beyond that. Rachel?
Thank you so much, Wes. I have a quick question, but this might be something like you just explained that was offloaded to the handbook. So I was wondering, do we need something in here that says no bullying is allowed in any electronic form?
Bullying is, I believe, in the 6141, it's one of the bullet points, cyberbullying. And that's the umbrella and also we make mention of cyberbullying in the handbook. It's in both places.
Where is it in this one? I'm sorry.
It's in 6141.328. It's one of the bullet points.
It's Rachel, it's on page 2. It's the
cyberbullying.
Yeah, and that's the state also uses that term as like an umbrella for any type of bullying done on a digital platform. So
thank you, Wes.
No problem. And it's also in the handbook, so it's in 2 places.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, and so, just to be clear, that's for both of these policies. So that would be 6141, 321, and 328. All right, very good.
Okay, I can take the next 2, Ken.
Okay, absolutely. Go right ahead.
All right, so the first one's relatively simple. We had a policy in the series 5000s, 5113.2 that specifically focused on attendance and truancy. Really, the change here is specific to chronic absenteeism, which is a part of the legal reference. So there's not that many changes here. You can see the red line. There is some repetition, but we believe that it's related to the legal reference of chronic absenteeism. So you'll notice that the repetitions in the first paragraph and then in the second paragraph speaks about adopting and maintaining procedures. The adopting and maintaining procedures to attendance and truancy is one piece. And then specific to chronic absenteeism as defined by the State Department of Education and the law is the adopting and maintaining of procedures in the second piece. It came right out of Shipman, this particular policy, not much to change. So you can see the red line there. And I will take any questions, but most of it, like I said, is the legal references that needed to be changed. So there wasn't much to talk about on this one.
Any board comment? All right, and this policy will then come back to the board for a second read and action.
Okay, so this one's long. You're going to see you have 30 pages, and the proposed changes are in red, obviously, and this is policy also in the Series 5000, policy 5114, that specifically references exclusion, suspension, and expulsion. We actually, even though it's a long policy, there was a lot of language here that came from past policies that had to be revised. And so we can just see how they've now transitioned into this particular policy specific to firearms and expulsions. And so you'll notice that there's red line throughout the policy, which we're making changes to. And then if you scroll all the way down, there's a additional old policy, and I'm just going to find it in my packet, and in yours, you're scrolling for quite a while until you see the green. And one of the interesting parts of this policy is that it didn't actually have, it's actually in your packets 102, if you're looking at it electronically, page 102. This policy didn't actually have a setup, like I didn't set the stage for the actual policy like most policies do. They give you a sense of what this policy is actually about. For whatever the reason in Shipman's, it actually didn't. It went straight to the definitions. So as a committee, we actually felt like there needed to be some type of setting the stage so that anyone who's reading this policy understands what the policy is generally about, or what discipline looks like. And so what you'll see in green is a brief narrative that comes predominantly off of the old policy to confuse things. One is 5114, and I think the other is 5441. We attempted not to make the narrative too long because we wanted to be sure that we didn't alter any of the legal references or the legal language that needed to be a part of the definition. So you'll notice that the green narrative is quite similar to what we had in 5441. Except we changed the language on the first two lines, which says that the board encourages teachers and administrator to use proactive and responsive strategies to support students in meeting the district's behavioral expectations and to reduce discipline referrals and offensives. And then the next paragraph is primarily what was there before. So that's really the only change from the Shipman's red line doc, is that green box, which is really just a setup to give those that are reading the document some kind of stage for what they're actually reading, rather than jumping right into definitions.
So do we have any, Dr. Silva, in your opinion, do we have any responsibility to outline what responsive options there are, or is that covered somewhere? Because it's just so fluid.
Yeah, so it's outlined in most of our handbooks, and that's most of the strategies that we use, right? Whether it's responsive classroom, ruler. I decided not to be specific, Liz, just because they oftentimes will change. And so rather than being specific to a particular approach that we're using at this time, and there's restorative practices, there's DBT, CBT, there's all kinds of things that we use in different settings. So we just kept that language somewhat vague so that we wouldn't have to come back and make that shift.
Yeah, so I just wonder in that case, if given the gravity of some of the outcomes that can be, that vagueness might not serve us. We may want to have an opinion on that.
We can get a legal opinion in on those first two lines. And Liz, I think that's one of the reasons that we struggled with really even adding a narrative because Shipman just went straight to the definitions, which
Yeah.
felt like it was a little off. What we originally had, if you look at the red line version up above, which is on page 71, it, let me see if it's here.
It is.
Actually, yeah, no, that one's actually 5114. What's not in your packet, let me see if it's down.
Is the
below.
5144? Is that what
It's
you're
the-
referring to?
Yes. Let me see if it's down below. I can bring that the next time. Oh, actually, here it is. It's on page 101. It's 5144. And so what was originally in that policy, which we're deleting completely now,
Oh, yeah.
says that the board encourages teachers and administrators to use positive rewards. And so actually that's probably a better version for you to look at rather than the green version. So you can see what was there.
Yeah.
And now what's not there. The only difference in it, I hope I'm being clear, is that this policy on page 101 of your packet is gone completely. So all we did was try to keep some little narrative there to set up for 5114, which can be a little confusing, but the use of positive rewards is not language that we really use. We don't give stickers, or we do for very specific students that might need it, but generally speaking, we try to support internal rewards as opposed to external. And so I thought that could be a little confusing. So that's why we changed the language a little bit. But if the board is giving me feedback that we should just double check to make sure that legal is comfortable with that, we can.
I think on that one, just, it's a contract to some degree. So I would, that is the one line that I would be just, what is proactive and responsive, and how or where do we define it, even if it's outside the policy?
Sure.
That's what I would ask, but.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll circle back with our attorney on that one with legal. Again, this is Shipman's policy and they didn't have any setup, so that may have been intentional. But it felt like it was awkward for the reader.
And that may also be a good way to we may be able to incorporate that into a handbook or somewhere else, and refer as defined in, or as outlined, or as listed in, the handbook, or some other section.
Thanks, Ken. Sure.
Any other comments?
That has to come back anyway, so I'll
Yep.
revisit that, and at our next board meeting, I'll bring that back.
Are there any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, and as Dr. De Silva just said, this will also be coming back for a second read to the board. All right, and I think we're on down to our items of information. I think this is you again, Dr. De Silva.
Okay, so much fun. All right, so we have our enrollment report, which seems to be fun every time we come to the Board of Education meeting. And I actually think it's even going to be slightly more entertaining tonight. And I'll explain why in 1 second. But John Mansfield, I don't know, I didn't ask you to, well, it's okay, we can go without it. If you had it handy, John, and you wanted to just put it on the screen. So Karen, you can speak to the enrollment if there's anything there that needs to be highlighted, but I'm going to speak to the 18 to 22 and the outplacement, add some clarity to that. And then, and actually Dr. Hanaway will jump in as well. Is there anything that you want to speak to?
Sure. So if I ever set my boundaries, let me know, Susie.
Okay.
Every month we present the enrollment. So what you see is the a couple pieces of information. The enrollment projections from Malone and Brune, which was from November 2020, and they project our K-12 enrollment. You then saw what we projected from our Power School in August of how many students are registered to attend our schools. This month, in September, you're going to see the numbers of how many students actually attended. And then next month, October 1 will be our actual official numbers of how many students are officially registered for the Ridgefield Public Schools, because there are official numbers. So September numbers are actually our official numbers, not official, our first numbers to you as who is actually here, because you saw projected, you saw registered, but now you're seeing who's actually here. But that is, as I said, K-12. And you'll see our typical ins and outs, and that number right now from what we expected in August is up by 14. You can see that number is now actually 64 up from projected. Dr. De Silva just mentioned she's gonna, and Dr. Hanaway talk about 18 to 22 in outplacement, but we know we have other students outside of the K-12 program who we are responsible for. And so they are also in these numbers, but they are not part of our official enrollment. Is that what you're gonna get to, Dr. De Silva?
Yes, you did the work for me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So with some feedback from Ken, we actually changed the chart to try to be clearer. So you'll see the negative numbers are in parentheses and the positives are not. And so the question that came up at the last board meeting, and actually the enrollment report that you're looking at says 18 to 21, but it really should be 18 to 22, is whether or not those two populations are in our projections. And so what happens with our 18 to 22 students, those students are no longer a part of they're not connected to a school. And so they are not part of the traditional projections when they're looking at enrollment by school. So that 18 to 22 number, Liz is going to speak to in a minute. The outplaced number, when we actually received a communication from a family member that wanted to know more about the outplaced number, and when we started pulling the different layers of the outplaced number, we realized that outplaced most often is connected to students who have an IEP and are no longer being serviced within our school community. Well, that's true. You would define that, or you would describe that as a student who is outplaced. In this number, however, is not just that population. There is another population of students that attend schools other than our RHS, let's just say, for high school, for example, a magnet school, and they are also a part of that number. So Liz can speak a little bit more to the numbers related to students with IEPs that are outplaced versus the numbers that are actually identified in this report. So again, we're going to try to get this right the next time, but we're going to try to clean up those two numbers so that you can see students who are outplaced. And I'm not even sure that this is the right report for it, to be honest, but students who are outplaced by way of an IEP versus students who are attending a program that is not one of our school-based programs. So we're going to try to clean that up for the next time that we're together. And again, I'm not sure that this report is the right report for.
Yeah. And Dr. De Silva, in all
Yeah.
due respect, we used to just do K-12 enrollment for the board, and the board just wanted to know who are we responsible for or who's not in our district. So the outplacement numbers meant anybody not in our schools, regardless special ed status, district initiated or parent.
Right.
So if the board's comfortable with that, it could be fine to leave it that way if they're okay with that.
So that's one piece. There was another piece that may have just escaped me, but it'll come back. So Liz, why don't you talk about the 18 to 22 numbers, practically speaking, how you plan for that population of 18 to 22, and practically speaking, because that was actually one of the questions that came up at one of our last meetings, how you plan for students who are outplaced by way of an IEP. How do you project those numbers? Again, these numbers are inclusive of students. I think there's about 10 students in these numbers that you're seeing today that are not just related to IEP, but maybe a part of a different high school program.
Sure. So I'll start with 18 to 22. Those students have received or have met, I'll say they've met the high school graduation requirements, which is how you are eligible to be part of the transition program, is that you have met the Ridgefield High School graduation requirements. Those students actually have the option of participating in the graduation. They don't receive a diploma yet until they're completed with the district, but so they no longer are captured within those Ridgefield High School numbers. The question that Sean, I believe, asked at the August meeting was, what was your projected and where did you start the year? So our projected for 18 to 22 was 10 students. As of today, we are now at 12 students. This report says 10. The difference in projecting and planning for 18 to 22, that's a little bit different than it is for students at the pre-K through 12 level, is we have a lot more fluidity with students deciding whether or not they want to participate in the program all the way up until the program begins and even after it begins, because these students are now adults and they make decisions depending on where their lives are and what they choose to do. So our projection was 10. We are today at 12. For our students who are outplaced via an IEP to a variety of private schools locally, our current number as of today is 37 via IEPs within that 47 number. Our projection starting this school year was 40, and we are currently at 37.
Liz, can you just speak to the variability of that outplaced number? And I think some of the challenges your department faces when trying to really project for what can or can't be. And then I think it might be helpful also just, I mentioned co-teaching earlier, and we're going to have a state of the state report on special education, but it might also be helpful for the Board of Education to understand how many students we welcomed to Ridgefield this school year with IEPs.
Sure. So as far as, so we did a January 23rd, 2021 budget presentation. And I think my and Tony's narrative at that time was, we haven't seen the impact of COVID yet. We're not really, we don't do contingency budgeting. We have patterns that we track, but we don't have clear evidence of COVID impact yet. So that was our message in January. As far as how we project and plan for students who may not be able to have their needs met within the Ridgefield Public Schools and need an outplacement, we see student individual situations, down the line. We see students who we are continuing to evolve their programming, and Tony and I consider whether or not we need to plan for the potential of outplacements in individual situations for sure. But we also do have multiple years of data of what we call rollover of outplacement. We don't know the kids, we don't know exactly where they're going to go, but there's a generic trend of students either coming back into district, moving out, and then new students who we didn't know about when we developed the budget, but we had a sense that there are about 4 to 5 students a year, by hook or by crook, wherever they go, wherever they come from, who we weren't sure about and weren't necessarily on our mind when we planned, but that number is pretty consistent year to year as of right now. So, of course, we felt confident in January about the impact of COVID. The spring of this past year, probably starting around March, we really saw the impact of COVID on our students, at least at that time, in terms of the amount of services that they needed and the amount of hours in those IEPs that were developed in annual reviews. The Bureau of Special Education charged districts with considering something called recovery services. And they provided very specific information to us that, Corey mentioned acceleration. And while all students are part of that acceleration process, but that each PPT had to consider the impact of COVID on students and how the IEP would be designed for recovery purposes. And our teams did that very, very well. And you saw me asking for a 2.5 increase in staff as a result of doing those recovery efforts. And we had an extremely robust ESY as a result as well. So I'm happy about that part of it, but it was, there was a big increase in services. The other thing that's happened that I have not seen since coming to Ridgefield, and now this is only beginning my 3rd year here, but since the end of last school year, we've had 31 students move into district who already had an IEP from elsewhere. I think the last time we met, or that I was last at a meeting in August, I said 25. Since then, we've had 6 more students. That is I don't have a one-to-one comparative to last year. We have a changeover in the registrar's office, and so they don't have the exact same report. So we're doing it manually right now in terms of, okay, between June and September of 2020, what did it look like? Because I know between June and September 2021, or at least as of September 27th, it's 31. That's a pretty significant increase. So to Susie's point earlier, I think co-teaching has so many benefits more than meets the eye, specifically structurally, fiscally, a level of continuity over time that doesn't have the up and downs and dips, and it also impacts all the services around it. But if we do continue in this 31 trend, I'll call it, it may not be the co-teaching is like I don't know if you remember, it was like a 4-year plan. We may not have time for a 4-year plan, at least this go around in this budget cycle. So it could be that we're seeing the highest of this peak of move-ins because of where we are in the school year, and then it's going to even out. I don't know. What I can also say that's an exciting thing is we've had more students return back into district from either outplacements, homeschool, or parents opting to just send on their own unilaterally to a private school than I've seen since we've come. So a lot of families are coming back into district from elsewhere. So that's an awesome trend as well. But it's all resulting at the same time with a pretty significant increase in not only the number of kids, but the actual amount of services.
So I just felt like that was an important piece to looking at enrollment. And then the last change that we'll need to make on this enrollment report is we actually say total RPS students, the 4,553 number. It really should, that row should be at the bottom. And so it should be inclusive, the 4,553 plus the 57 students, because those are the children that ultimately we're responsible for, regardless of where their setting is. We have, we include all of those students.
59 students.
What was that?
It's 59 students, 59, 12 plus 47.
Well, actually, wouldn't it just be the 12, Dr. De Silva, because the 47 were already counted?
Where are you getting 12? Am I not looking at the same? I'm looking at 10.
From Liz about 5 minutes.
Sorry.
I'm looking
between when we created this report at the end of last week versus today.
Yes, I'm looking at the actual report, but the way in which the report should have been created is we should have that row at the bottom. So yes. 12.
And to Ken's point, the 47 are double counted, correct?
They would be double counted in that case. I think you just need to add the 12 to the total students.
No, the outplaced students, they are not part of the projected, but in terms of looking at how many students we're providing for, those outplaced students are not in a school. So when we're just looking at enrollment, not when we're looking at projections, but when we're just looking at enrollment, those students are not in any school. Same with the 18 to 22. So that those students program is in addition to. When we're looking at projections, yes, Ken, they could, the outplaced students can be double dip, not the 18 to 22, because they don't have a school in which to associate themselves with.
Right. How, to your point just a minute ago, how are homeschool kids counted? Would they be part of the outplaced group?
They are not. So homeschooled students are not a part of our enrollment, our actual enrollment at all.
Right.
So we, that is an area that we are tightening up since Ms. Gillette has arrived, and getting a better handle on how many students have disenrolled to homeschool, what their programs look like, how we can be a support to families, ensuring that we've done everything we need to do to keep children obviously in school, because that ultimately that's what we want for them, and just being sure that we understand why a parent's making the choice, as it's an obligation that we have to all students. So we're tightening up that structure. Again, parents have the right to do that, and I'm not suggesting that they don't at all, but we just want to be really clear on understanding who those students are and what their programs look like when they're not in the public school.
So similarly, they would be included in the projections, but right now we're not including them in our.
Correct.
Because we're not responsible for them in a larger.
They're not registered with us anymore.
Not registered, right, exactly.
Yeah. So I know it's taken us a while to become clear with this. One of these days, we're going to have this just right. We're not going to need to provide this much context. But it's been actually I think it's been a meaningful discussion, and if nothing else. So, sometimes if you believe in Margaret Wheatley's chaos theory, this might be one of those moments. So hopefully as a result of this, we're all coming out a little bit clearer around actual numbers that we're looking at.
So we will have a fourth read of this at the next, in a month from now. So
One more go.
Yep. With official numbers.
Right, with official numbers, exactly.
Right.
Okay. And Karen, you'll be doing the staffing report?
Yeah, basically for the staffing report, I always ask if there's questions, because you can see every month there's ins and outs, and my office is very busy processing, resignations, retirements, and new hires. So I'm here for questions.
Are there any?
I have a question. Hi, Karen. Just a question, given the recent rules around forced vaccinations for all staff and such, has that been a cause for additional resignations from the school?
None from any certified staff or non-certified staff at this moment, because there's a testing requirement.
Okay.
But I have lost a couple subs.
Okay.
So that could change obviously over this week, because there's some leeway according to the DPH for this week. So that could change next week, but not for this week.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the board?
Liz Flogel, just a point around that is that we're not responsible for food service or transportation and tracking them. They actually track it and then they certify it with us. So I received actually a question today, I believe, from one of the news reporters asking for that data, and we don't house that. They house it and then they certify it to us. So that's just another piece of information that some people may be wondering about. So that pool may be different, but not the one we're tracking.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready to move on to correspondence to the board. Or sorry, public comment is the first piece of that. And
so good evening. I don't see any attendees at this point in time. So I will move on to our correspondence report. So we received 9 emails since our last Board of Education meeting. 1 email regarded the data on outplaced students and special needs identification data at BP. 1 email advocated for the early morning drop-off program. 1 email regarded the safe return plan and the optional COVID-19 testing program. 2 emails regarded NWEA. 1 email regarded the optimization of transportation and healthy start times, and 3 emails were operational. That's it. Hope everyone has a great night.
Are there any other questions or comments from the board at all? All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Sean, a second. Kathleen, all in favor of adjourning? And that is everyone that's present. Okay, thank you all very much. Everyone stay safe, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Night.